Victoria Strange is a wildlife biologist with experience conducting surveys for birds, mammals, herpetofauna, and fish throughout the U.S. She currently manages 4 preserves for Palm Beach County in Florida. And we are going to join her in the field tonight, which is pretty darn cool. So I'm going to bring Tori in with us right now for a little greeting. Hey, Tori, how are you?
Hey, Joe, I'm good.
That's awesome. It's so great to have you joining us live tonight. Before I play the video, can you tell us where you are?
Well, right now I'm up in North Palm Beach, but I work all the way from Jupiter down to Lake Worth area down to Delray, spanning the whole Palm Beach County area.
All right. Well, the amazing Kate Bosler, who will be joining us at other points throughout this weekend, filmed a video with you. So what do you say? Should we pop in the video and go from there?
Sure, that sounds great.
All right, so just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to queue up our video here. There it is, and here we go.
My name is Katie Bosler. I am an investigative environmental journalist, and I'm joined today by a speaker I've known for over 10 years, Tori Strange, one of the most dedicated conservationists that I've ever met. And her frog catching skills are yet to be surpassed. Today, she will be taking us into the nature of Florida in Palm Beach County. We'll get a rare look at land that hasn't been developed for some of Florida's quintessential human activities like golfing and yachting. Her reserve shows plants and creatures that are safely tucked away for now. She'll get into a little bit of the challenges that face the area. She's a wildlife biologist, and she's researched all walks and flights of life, from birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and I've even seen her free dive deep into the ocean to learn more about fish and marine mammals. I'm willing to bet that she can hold her breath longer than most people out there. Her graduate work took her into the high altitude of Nicaragua, and she's speaking up to us today in her current role working for Palm Beach County, where she manages 4 preserves. We're about to take an excursion with her where we will learn about scrub habitat, Florida's oldest community type that is facing pressures from surrounding development and other challenges that her and her team work hard every day in the field to address. Tori, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are? I see some really cool plants and trees and environment in the background. Are you at one of your sites?
Yes, I am coming to you from Palm Beach County, Florida, in the Southeast Peninsula. We are on a scrub site, Lantana Scrub Natural Area, managed by the Department of Environmental Resources. And here in South Florida, we have no shortage of pressures on biodiversity. Encroaching development, like you can see to the south of us, causes direct habitat loss through land conversion, and basically eliminates functioning native assemblages. Along with that, fragmentation causes a loss of all the sensitive species, such as scrub jays, which family groups require over 20 acres of well-managed habitat to survive. The remaining populations on these isolated fragments are subjected to inbreeding depression, such as is being researched in the gopher tortoise. And I see one actually over at the fence right now. Yeah.
Not a bad gig hanging out with gopher tortoises.
No, it's a pretty fun day when it's filled with gopher tortoises.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes this habitat unique? What's it made up of? What's around you?
So I am standing in front of a prickly pear cactus, one of the iconic species of arid ecosystems. It's very well adapted to high periods of drought stress, and it has beautiful yellow flowers that we'll see later on. And so scrub is Florida's oldest natural community, like Katie said, and it's actually like Florida's desert. It occupies high and dry sandy soils that have low nutrient content, and it has a sparse herbaceous cover, open sandy patches, and low shrubs sometimes with a sand pine or slash pine overstory. So Palm Beach County had the foresight to see that all of the last remaining lands were being developed. So they took the opportunity to save some of these last intact habitats. And since then, they have conserved over 30,000 acres of land. And this is actually our most newly acquired site.
And I see some of that, like sort of, is that sand that you're looking at below you, or are plants able to root in that? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so scrub adapted plants often have really, really long tap roots because the water table is way far below this sandy surface. And then other plants are actually adapted with shallow roots, which can uptake the low nutrient content and organic debris at the top of the soil. And see this crust right here? This is made of organic matter that takes many, many years to form. And it's like a biological crust of microorganisms.
So is that sensitive to people walking around? How do you manage for humans visiting the area?
It is. Yeah, we try to keep them on the trails because it is very sensitive to disturbance and it takes a really, really long time to form. And so actually we do have some another really cool species that sits on the surface of the sand. It's called lichen. And it's actually a symbiotic relationship between algae and fungus. The fungus provides the structure and the algae provides the working parts. So this right here is a type of cladonia. It's called a puffball or reindeer lichen. This right here is called a cigar ash. And then this is another cladonia species.
Wow, incredible. Are they just on the surface, just lying on top of it?
Yeah, they're just laying on the surface. They don't have any roots. They absorb everything directly through their outer covering, which is not very thick. And this actually makes them prone to absorbing toxins. So they're used as a biological indicator of air quality a lot.
And so tell us about that. What is the air quality like there? Is it healthier than surrounding areas because it has these plants?
So we are affected by roadways such as I-95, and I've seen the effects of that. In the portions of my sites that are closer to I-95, I tend to see less lichens, and the further away you get from I-95 in the traffic, the more you'll see lichens.
Are there animal species that are dependent or able to exist there because of things like the lichen? I know something you pay a lot of attention to is how the species are interacting with one another and how they make possible habitat for all kinds of creatures who come to visit them and depend on them.
Yeah, so it actually can be browsed by some animals, and it is allelopathic, so it creates plant inhibitive substances that help maintain those open spaces,
And
which
so
is really cool.
you pointed to a gopher tortoise earlier. I
Yeah.
don't get to see those every day. Can you maybe head in that direction and tell us a little bit about those cool creatures?
Yeah, we could see if the gopher tortoise is still over here. He was over by the fence line earlier. So,
and they're native to Florida, is that right?
Yeah, so gopher tortoises are an endangered species. They live about 40 to 60 years. They are actually a keystone species because they dig burrows in which up to 360 other species of animals live in, including a lot that can't dig their own burrows. So here we actually have one. As you can see, they have really strong forearms that they use as like shovels to dig their burrows. and they are protected by very thick scales on their arms and head.
Oh, wow. Oh,
And the top portion of their shell is called a carapace, and the bottom is called a plastron. And males have a concavity in their plastron, and females have a flat plastron.
so are we looking at a female or a male?
I'm not sure because I haven't picked them up. We technically aren't supposed.
Oh, look at them go. And so about how many live on this site? Do they interact with one another?
They're mostly solitary. They spend about 80% of their time in their burrows. During mating season, though, they do become more active with each other. They interact more. The males have aggressive behavior towards each other, and the males follow the females around and harass them. And so they do interact with each other. Sometimes I'll see two in one burrow. But that's rare. They usually are off by themselves, though. We have about 6 gopher tortoises on this site, which is a pretty low population. Another one of my sites has over 100.
Wow. And what kind of food are they after?
They're after all the herbaceous species, so they can eat up to 300 species of plants. They like wiregrass, andropogon. They actually can eat prickly pear, cactus, and gopher apple leaves. So they're pretty versatile in their food habits.
In what kind of ways are you managing for them? What challenges do they face?
So in Florida, we have another issue with biodiversity we have is that we don't have fire on the landscape like we used to. So our understory becomes very overgrown, and it's hard for gopher tortoises to navigate this, and it's hard for herbaceous species to be able to germinate because they're shaded out. So on small urban areas like this, if we can't do prescribed burning because we're surrounded by a bunch of smoke sensitive areas, we do mechanical fuel reduction. And so we will go and chop the understory vegetation to create more of those open, low shrubby spaces so that herbaceous species can proliferate more, and so that gopher tortoises and other animals will have more food sources.
And so the tool of using fire for the habitat, is that something that you yourself are directly involved in?
Yes, yeah, I am on the burn crew, and we try to get as many burn days as possible on our sites, but we're spread pretty thin, and there's a lot of high priority places, like larger pieces of land that are flatwoods that are more adapted to a higher fire frequency. So those need to be burned like every 2 to 3 years. Whereas scrub is a little bit longer of a fire return interval of anywhere from 5 to 40 years, depending on the understory vegetation.
So I know that invasive species is something that Florida deals a lot with. Of course, the pythons and the Everglades famously comes to mind. Do invasives affect your site? And if so, how do you manage for them?
Yeah, invasives are another big issue in South Florida, both plants and animals. We have less exotics at scrub sites because they have a harder time gaining a foothold, but we still have them. And during the growing season, a large percentage of our time is dedicated to eradicating or keeping these species at bay. We do can removal and herbicide applications usually.
And so a lot of these species are unique to me. I'm just looking at these big bulbous plants and bushes behind us. Is there anything you can point out and show us some cool leaves or flowers, or what do you got going on back there?
For sure. So we have actually at our feet, we have the Curtis's milkweed right here. And it's about to bloom. You can see it's in inflorescences right now. It's a rare Florida endemic. They can live up to 25 years. Insect larvae use it as shelter and food, such as the queen butterfly. It's pollinated by skippers and hair streaks, which are actually having a difficult time these days finding these scattered, isolated populations. You can hear the gopher tortoise crashing through the softball meadow.
He's got big plans for the morning. So endemic means that a species only exists in that region. How much on the site is endemic?
So I would say we have at least 10 endemic species on this site, if not more, but I can count at least 10.
Are there any plants that you have, I'm not saying you have favorites or play favorites, but anything that you're always excited to see when you're out on your sites?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always excited to see the Lechia serenua, which is right over here.
I'm impressed by all the taxonomy you have memorized.
Here's a little tiny one. And then we have a bigger one over here. It is a really cool species that we don't know a lot about yet. It's a rare endemic as well. It's state threatened. It has really fuzzy leaves. It's highly adapted to fire and germinates post-fire very readily. It has really cool red and yellow flowers in the spring. So here's another one. So its common name is nodding pinweed.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
And what about in terms of things that are wiggling around out there? What kind of reptiles do you see? Amphibians, smaller animals?
I see a lot of snakes. So we have a ton of black racers on the site. We have some other, we have lizards. We have native green anoles. We just saw one earlier. And we have the 6-line race runners, which is a really, really fast skink-like creature. And then we have a bunch of exotic lizards too. The curly-tailed lizard and the Cuban brown anole, and green iguanas.
I've seen those little curly tails. They sure are fast darting around.
Yeah.
So Tori, go ahead.
Oh, so then I just wanted to show you another species right over here. This is called gopher apple, and it's a low-growing clonal species. Only the very tips of it are above ground. Most of it's underground. And its fruits are eaten by gopher tortoises. And it's pollinated by a lot of Lepidoptera species.
Wow, pretty.
And so then I want to take you guys over here to show you a few more species.
We have a few minutes here to check those out, and then I want to ask you about your public education efforts, because I know that's unique to the sites you manage, is that people from the surrounding areas are allowed on and can be a bit of a refuge for people. So would love to end on that.
Yes. Okay, that sounds great. All right, so now we're coming up to an unnatural berm. This was the result of spoil piles made decades ago. So it's one of the scars of human disturbance on this site. And here you can see we have this interesting orange vine. It's called love vine, and it's a native species. It acts as a nuisance sometimes in the absence of fire, but it actually has a suppressive effect on the oaks. So it does help to keep them back sometimes because they do get overgrown.
Well, love is messy and complicated.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and here's the prickly pear flower with a little bee all up in it.
Aw. Well, I think that's a beautiful last shot to end on. Tori, if you want to just maybe wrap up with sharing something about the public education element of the site, that would be great.
Okay. So we have regular events on our sites. Every year we actually have a natural areas festival. It's been postponed because due to COVID the past few years, but we have a whole week long of events where we just try to hit as many sites as possible. And we take them in the wetlands, we take them in the uplands, we take them in the intercoastal to see islands that we've restored, and we have a lot of different types of education for children, adults, any age group. So definitely look us up if you're down in Palm Beach County.
Well, we'll put links in the chat for people to be able to follow along and see. I know your site has an Instagram with pictures of all of your wonderful creatures. We definitely want to keep tabs on that gopher tortoise and see what they're up to day to day. So Tori Strange, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Of course. Yeah. And just to end, I want to show you one more cool species that's iconic in Florida. We have the air plants. This species is Tillandsia utriculata, and it can live up to 20 years old. And in it, it collects water for dry periods, and frogs, snakes, arthropods, centipedes all use this as a water source when it's really, really dry out.
All right. Thank you, air plant. We love to see it. All right, Tori. Thank you.
Of course. So good to be with you.
All right. What a great clip. I'm going to bring Tori back in with us now. Tori, that was so cool. Thank you for that amazing walkthrough of that ecosystem.
Of course. I was glad to share it.
So are you in that ecosystem right now?
No, I'm actually up in marsh, like intertidal area right now.
Yeah. Can we do a little pan around, see where you are?
Yeah.
Let me make that full screen here. There we go.
So I have mangroves and palm trees behind me right now.
All right. Very cool. Well, that was our first gopher tortoise ever joining the Global Biodiversity Festival. So that was pretty cool. I'm glad we were able to see that. And what I really found fascinating was, talking about it being a keystone species and the burrows that they dig being used by so many other animals in the habitat. It reminds me, we just did a live event for students from the American Prairie Reserve. And we learned about how the prairie dogs do the same thing, the keystone species out in that prairie environment. So it's so neat to see the way that different animals are kind of adapted to the same role in different ecosystems.
Yeah, like analogously. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Yeah. Well, to those tuning in, don't forget, you can share some more questions in the chat. We'll keep an eye out for them, but I've grabbed a few here to start. And so the first one is about ecosystems in Florida in general. So I think when a lot of people think about Florida, they probably think about the Everglades, maybe the springs, maybe the marine environment. Do you think, scrub? Do you think because is it tougher to convince people to want to conserve and pay attention to that ecosystem?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it is too. Until people actually get on the ground and visit it and they figure out how enchanting it really is. A lot of people have hesitancies about going out there because they don't know it. There's a lot of thorny plants. It's very hot because the sand is reflecting the sun. So there's definitely a lot of things that keep people from the scrub, but once they get in there, they definitely see how magical it is. And it's such a great place to develop because it's high and dry, very well drained. You don't have to do a lot of land conversion to build upon it. So people kind of just say, well, it's empty space, not being used. So that's kind of the mindset that gets taken when they take the scrub and develop it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, anything that makes the development easier always makes it more of a target. So
Exactly.
you may have mentioned this in the video, but about what percent of scrub is protected in Florida?
I read about 30%. But that is what remained after a lot of it had already been taken.
Yeah.
So I've also heard the statistic that only 5% of scrub habitat that used to exist actually remains.
Okay. All right.
So
You
very small portion.
No, definitely, absolutely. Your role in the preserves do you find it's a big education role where you're trying to share, like you did with us today, the endemic species, the relationships, the gopher tortoise? Do you find that's a big part of your role?
I do. It's not only a role that I like doing because I think it's important, but it's also a required role. We do have the responsibility in as land managers to spend a proportion of our time educating the public. So when I see them on my sites and they ask me questions, I'll engage with them. And then we also have like special events where I try to cover as many topics as possible, and try to endear people to these species that they might otherwise be kind of hesitant around. And like one of my coworkers and I have really started this bug bio blitz, where we try to hit as many of our sites as possible and catalog the invertebrate species that we see. And we get people there that would never have touched an insect before that, and we get them catching them and asking all sorts of questions, wanting to identify them to the species as best as possible. So I think it's really good way of getting people on board. And I mean, the citizens are the ones that are supporting these bills that are getting passed to give us the funds to be able to sustain these lands. So we need
Yeah,
to get everyone on board with that because we want their vote.
of course. Yeah, and I love that, getting people excited about the invertebrates.
Yeah,
That's always an important thing to do.
yeah, it's a little thing.
Awesome. Well, Tori, I can't believe how fast half an hour flew by. That was such a great tour of the ecosystem. Maybe just squeeze in, because you mentioned that these habitats are fragmented. Is there some effort underway to try and maybe create corridors between the scrub habitats?
There are some more uh, further inland, where there's larger swaths, like the
Yeah,
Lake Wales region. When you're out on the coast where I am, it's done. The land between the fragments is so heavily converted
yeah.
and impermeable. There's no passageway any longer. So we just try to do our best to retain what's on there and, you know, do our best to manage the land so that they can survive in what is left. Yeah.
Well, Tori, well, obviously a huge shout out to Kate for being a great host for that recording. Thank you for getting out into the field and taking us into that ecosystem, because, you know, pictures are great, but seeing it kind of firsthand is, you know, one step higher, right? So thank you so much for doing that for us. Thank you for joining for some Q&A and being outside to do it again, because that's so important.
Of course. I'm happy to do it.
All right.
Yes.
Well,
thank you, Joe.
Tori, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the weekend. And hopefully we talk again soon.
All right, great. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Tori.